Sometimes the loneliest souls find each other in the most unexpected places. In a world that had given up on both of them, a broken-down cowboy and a killer bull were about to discover what it truly means to trust again. In Cedar Ridge, everyone knew about Thunder, the massive black bull that had already killed 3 men and injured countless others. When Jake Sullivan, a drifter with nothing left to lose, claimed he could gentle the beast, the whole town thought he'd lost his mind. "That bull will kill you," they warned, but Jake walked into that pen anyway. What happened between man and animal defied everything the townspeople believed about both creatures. Through quiet patience and stubborn faith, an impossible friendship began to form. Together, they would face dangers that tested not just their bond, but their very survival. But how does a man with nothing win the heart of a beast that trusts no one? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dust hung thick in the air as Jake Sullivan walked down the main street of Cedar Ridge, his worn boots leaving prints in the dirt that seemed to mark his arrival like a prophecy. His clothes were travel-stained and patched, his hat brim shadowing eyes that had seen too much of life's harder lessons. In his saddlebags, wrapped carefully in an old bandana, lay his father's worn Bible leather-bound pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins, a testament to faith that Jake himself had lost somewhere along the way. The town of Cedar Ridge sat like a tired old man in the desert, its buildings weathered by wind and time. Once, it had been a thriving cattle town, but those days were fading faster than paint on the saloon's false front. The railroad had passed them by, taking their prosperity with it, and now only the stubborn and the desperate remained. Jake pushed through the bat-wing doors of Martha's Saloon, the only establishment that still kept its lights burning past sundown. Martha Hendricks, a woman of 45 with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held both kindness and wariness in equal measure, looked up from wiping down glasses. "You look like a man who's traveled far," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd come west from Missouri. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Looking for work," Jake replied, his voice rough from days of riding through dust and wind. "I heard you folks might have need of someone good with difficult animals." Martha's laugh was short and bitter. "Difficult animals? Mister, we got one animal in this town that's beyond difficult. That black devil has put 3 good men in the ground and sent twice as many to Doc Hayes with broken bones. Nobody works with Thunder anymore. They just pray he dies of old age before he kills anyone else." As if summoned by her words, Sheriff Morrison pushed through the doors, his badge catching the lamplight. Tom Morrison was a man in his 50s, gray-bearded and careful, who'd kept the peace in Cedar Ridge for 2 decades. He sized up Jake with experienced eyes. "Stranger," Morrison nodded. "Martha telling you about our local menace?" "She mentioned a difficult bull," Jake said carefully. Morrison's expression darkened. "Thunder's not difficult, friend. He's a killer. Pure and simple. 2,000 pounds of hate and muscle, with horns that could punch through a tree trunk. Cornelius Blackwood keeps him penned up at his ranch, but I swear that beast is waiting for his chance to finish what he started." "What did he start?" Jake asked. Martha and Morrison exchanged glances. Finally, Morrison spoke. 3 years ago, Thunder killed Billy Hawkins, trampled him to death during a branding. 6 months later, he gored Pete Martinez so bad the man lived 3 days before the fever took him. Last year, it was young Tommy Chun. Poor kid was just trying to move Thunder from one pen to another. They found pieces of that boy scattered across 50 yards of corral. Jake absorbed this information without flinching, though something in his chest tightened. "And Blackwood keeps him why?" "Because Cornelius Blackwood is a fool with more money than sense," Martha spat. "That bull's got the finest bloodlines in the territory. Blackwood figures if he can ever break Thunder, he'll be worth a fortune for breeding." Meanwhile, that animal gets meaner and more dangerous every day. The saloon door swung open again, and Doc Hayes entered, his black medical bag in hand and exhaustion written across his weathered face. Samuel Hayes had been doctoring folks in Cedar Ridge since before the town had a name, and his gentle manner had earned him respect from everyone, even the hardest men. "Evening, Martha." "Sheriff." Doc Hayes nodded, then looked at Jake with professional interest. "You look like you've been riding hard, son. Everything all right?" "Just travel-weary," Jake replied. "These folks were telling me about a problem bull." "Doc." Hayes' face grew somber. "Thunder. I've patched up more men hurt by that animal than I care to count. Set more broken bones, stitched more tears." He shook his head. "That bull's not just dangerous. He's smart. He knows exactly how to hurt a man, and he enjoys it." Jake felt the weight of his father's Bible in his saddlebag, remembered the words his father had read to him as a child about gentling the wild beasts, about patience and understanding conquering fear. Maybe he's just been handled wrong. The three locals stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. Sheriff Morrison was the first to speak. "Mister, I don't know what your name is or where you come from, but if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you best put that notion right out of your head. Smarter men than you have tried to work with Thunder. They're all either dead or wishing they were. Name's Jake Sullivan," he said quietly, "and I used to have a way with difficult animals. Before," he stopped himself, not ready to share the failures that had brought him here. Martha studied his face in the lamplight. "Before what?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously moving to touch the Bible through the leather of his saddlebag. "Before I lost everything that mattered to me, my wife, my daughter, my ranch, my faith in pretty much everything." He met their eyes. "Sometimes a man's got nothing left but the chance to do one thing right." Doc Hayes leaned forward. "Jake, I can see you're a man who's known hardship. But Thunder isn't a chance for redemption. He's a death sentence with hooves." "Maybe," Jake said, "but I'd like to see him for myself." Sheriff Morrison stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I can't stop you from looking, but I won't let you kill yourself on my watch. You want to see Thunder. You see him from outside the pen. You don't go in there, understand? Not unless you want Doc Hayes to be measuring you for a pine box." Jake nodded. "Fair enough." As the evening wore on, Jake learned more about Cedar Ridge and its people. The town was struggling, its population dwindling as younger folks headed for opportunities in Denver and Colorado Springs. The cattle ranches were barely surviving, and Blackwood's spread was the largest and most prosperous left in the valley. Cornelius Blackwood himself was a man of contradictions, wealthy but desperate, proud but foolish. He'd bought Thunder 3 years ago from a stock dealer who'd warned him about the bull's temperament. Blackwood had been certain he could break any animal, but Thunder had proven him catastrophically wrong. "Blackwood's getting desperate," Martha confided as she served Jake a plate of beef stew. "He's invested a fortune in that bull, and Thunder's eaten up 3 years of his life. The man's too proud to admit defeat, but too scared to try again himself. What about his hands? Don't they work with the bull?" Morrison laughed grimly. "Blackwood can't keep hands. Word's gotten around about Thunder. No cowboy worth his salt will work for a man who keeps a killer in his corral. The few men Blackwood's got left give that pen a wide berth." Jake ate his stew in thoughtful silence, watching the 3 locals through the lamplight. These were good people, he realized. Worn down by hard times and harder luck, but fundamentally decent. They'd accepted him without question, fed him, warned him of danger. It had been a long time since Jake had felt that kind of simple human kindness. "I appreciate the warning," he said finally, "but I'd still like to ride out to Blackwood's place tomorrow. See this Thunder for myself." Martha shook her head. "You're determined to do this foolish thing, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am, I believe I am," Doc Hayes sighed. "Then I'll make sure my surgical instruments are clean. You're going to need them." As the night deepened and the conversation turned to other matters, Jake found himself thinking about the bull named Thunder. In his mind, he could see his father's handwriting in the margins of the old Bible. Notes about patience and understanding, about the way fear and pain could twist any creature into something dangerous. His father had been a man of deep faith and deeper wisdom, able to calm the wildest horses with nothing but time and kindness. Jake had inherited that gift once. Before Sarah's mother died in childbirth, before grief and guilt had driven him to drink, before he'd lost his daughter's respect and his own sense of purpose, before he'd become just another broken-down cowboy with nothing left to lose. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what Thunder needed, a man with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Dawn broke pale and dusty over the Blackwood Ranch, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and rust. Jake had spent the night in Martha's small boarding room above the saloon, but sleep had been elusive. His father's Bible lay open on the nightstand, its pages filled with underlined passages about faith and redemption that seemed to mock him in the gray morning light. The Blackwood spread stretched across several thousand acres of rangeland, dominated by a large ranch house, built of local stone and timber. Cornelius Blackwood himself was waiting on the front porch when Jake rode up, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of old money and older pride. "You must be the fellow Tom Morrison told me about," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of an Eastern education. "Says you think you can work with Thunder." "I'd like to try," Jake replied, dismounting and removing his hat respectfully. "If you're willing." Blackwood studied him with shrewd blue eyes. "What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe because I understand what it's like to be written off as hopeless." Something flickered in Blackwood's expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "I've invested 3 years and more money than I care to calculate in that bull. He's cost me the best hands in the territory and nearly bankrupted me in vet bills and repairs. Give me one good reason why I should let you anywhere near him." "Because," Jake said simply, "you're running out of options." Blackwood's laugh was bitter. "That's honest, at least. Come on then, let's see what you make of my investment." They walked across the ranch yard toward a series of corrals and outbuildings. As they approached, Jake could hear it, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was the sound of raw, concentrated anger, of a creature that had given up on everything except rage. The pen that held Thunder was built like a fortress. Heavy timber rails reinforced with steel, posts sunk deep enough to anchor a building. The gate was secured with not one, but 3 separate latches, each showing the scratches and dents of repeated impacts. Scattered around the pen's perimeter were the remnants of previous attempts to contain or work with the bull-broken ropes. Splintered wood, and near the gate, a trampled cowboy hat, its crown crushed and stained with something dark that Jake preferred not to identify. That blood-stained gate latch would become seared in Jake's memory. The bent and twisted metal that spoke of Thunder's desperate attempts to break free. The dark stains that told of violence and pain. It was more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of the wall that existed between man and beast, built from fear and reinforced by blood. And then Jake saw Thunder himself. The bull stood in the center of the pen, like a black mountain, his massive head lowered and his eyes fixed on the approaching men. He was enormous, easily 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone, with a chest broad enough to serve as a barn door and legs like tree trunks. His horns were thick as a man's arm and sharp as sabers, scarred from battles, both with other bulls and with the wooden rails of his prison. But it was Thunder's eyes that struck Jake most forcefully. They burned with intelligence and fury. But underneath the anger, Jake recognized something else, something he'd seen in his own mirror too many times. Pain. Deep, abiding pain that had festered into hatred. Magnificent, isn't he? Blackwood sighed, though his voice held no warmth. Perfect confirmation. Bloodlines that trace back to the finest Spanish stock. He should have been the foundation of an empire. Thunder's head swung toward them at the sound of Blackwood's voice, and the bull's entire body tensed. A low growl emerged from deep in his chest, a sound that raised the hair on Jake's arms. What happened to make him like this? Jake asked. Blackwood's expression darkened. The dealer I bought him from wasn't entirely forthcoming about Thunder's history. Apparently, the bull had been mishandled by his previous owners, beaten, starved, kept in conditions that would drive any animal mad. By the time I got him, the damage was already done. Jake studied Thunder's scarred hide, noting the marks of whips and brands beyond the normal ranch markings. And your men tried to break him the hard way. My men tried to do their jobs, Blackwood snapped. Thunder killed them for it. Maybe they were just doing their jobs the wrong way. Blackwood turned to face Jake fully. Are you saying this is my fault? I'm saying maybe nobody's asked Thunder what he needs. The rancher stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Either way, I can't afford to lose another hand to that animal. Then don't think of me as a hand, Jake said quietly. Think of me as someone with nothing left to lose. Thunder had been watching their exchange with those intelligent, angry eyes. Now the bull began to pace, his hooves striking the ground with deliberate force. Each step seemed to echo like thunder. Perhaps that was how he'd gotten his name. All right, Blackwood said finally. You want to try, you try. But I won't be responsible for what happens to you in there. Jake nodded and began walking toward the gate. Behind him, he heard Blackwood calling to his remaining hands, and within minutes, a small crowd had gathered to watch the stranger, who thought he could succeed where others had died trying. The blood-stained latch felt cold under Jake's fingers as he worked it free. The second latch came next, then the third. Thunder watched every movement, his body coiled like a spring, ready to explode into violence. Jake opened the gate and stepped inside. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Thunder lowered his massive head and charged with the force of a locomotive, his hooves pounding the earth and his breath coming in explosive snorts. The spectators shouted warnings, sure they were about to witness another death. But Jake didn't run. He didn't even move. He simply stood there, calm and still, his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on Thunder's face. At the last possible second, Thunder stopped. The bull's horns were inches from Jake's chest, close enough that Jake could feel the heat radiating from the animal's body. Thunder's eyes were wide with confusion. This was not how men usually responded to his charges. They ran, they screamed, they fought. They didn't just stand there like trees, unmoved and unafraid. Easy, big fellow, Jake said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to hurt you. Thunder snorted and backed up a step, his head still lowered but his eyes puzzled. Jake remained perfectly still, speaking in that same gentle tone. I know you're angry. I know you're scared. I know what it's like when the whole world seems set against you. The bull's ears flicked forward, actually listening to the sounds Jake was making. No one had ever spoken to Thunder like this, with patience, with understanding, with something that might have been compassion. For the next hour, Jake simply stood in the pen, sometimes talking softly, sometimes silent. Thunder circled him warily, occasionally feinting a charge but never following through. The crowd outside the pen grew larger as word spread through the ranch, but Jake ignored them all. As the sun climbed higher, something remarkable happened. Thunder's aggressive posture began to relax. His head came up, His breathing slowed, and his pacing became less frantic. He was still wary, still ready to attack if threatened, but the immediate rage had cooled to mere suspicion. When Jake finally emerged from the pen, the crowd was silent with amazement. Blackwood stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to believe what he'd witnessed. "How?" the rancher asked. Jake carefully secured the blood-stained latch, his fingers lingering on the twisted metal. "I listened," he said simply. "And I think he's been waiting a long time for someone to do that." Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face pale with relief and disbelief. "Jake, I've seen some foolish things in my time, but what you just did was necessary," Jake finished. "Thunder's not a killer, Sheriff. He's just a scared, angry animal who's been hurt too many times by people who didn't understand him." "So, what happens now?" Blackwood asked. Jake looked back at Thunder, who was watching him from the center of the pen. For the first time since Jake had arrived, the bull's eyes held something other than rage. "Now," Jake said, "I come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until Thunder decides he can trust me. And if he doesn't..." Jake touched the Bible in his saddlebag, thinking of his father's patient wisdom and his own desperate need for redemption. "Then I guess we'll find out together what happens when two broken souls try to heal each other." As he rode away from the Blackwood Ranch, Jake could feel Thunder's eyes following him. Behind him, the blood-stained gate latch caught the afternoon sunlight, a reminder of all the violence and fear that had come before. But maybe, just maybe, it could also become a symbol of the barrier they were going to break down together one day, one moment of trust at a time. Jake returned to the Blackwood Ranch at dawn the next morning, carrying a small cloth bag in his shirt pocket. Inside were a handful of sugar cubes, simple white squares, that Martha had given him from her saloon storeroom. "Animals have a sweet tooth just like people," she'd said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes the smallest gestures build the biggest bridges." Thunder was waiting for him, standing alert in the center of his pen as Jake approached. The bull's posture was less aggressive than the day before, but his eyes remained wary and watchful. Jake could see the intelligence there, the careful evaluation of this strange human who had dared to enter his domain without violence or fear. "Morning, Thunder," Jake said quietly, settling down on a wooden crate someone had left near the pen. He made no move toward the gate, instead pulling out one of the sugar cubes and holding it where Thunder could see it. "Brought you something." Thunder's nostrils flared, catching the sweet scent. His head tilted slightly, a gesture so human-like that Jake felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time anyone had brought Thunder a gift instead of a whip or a branding iron? I "No, you don't trust me yet," Jake continued, his voice carrying across the morning air like a prayer. "Can't say I blame you. People have given you every reason to expect the worst from them." He placed the sugar cube on the ground near the fence and backed away. Thunder watched this ritual with intense focus, his massive head swinging between Jake and the offered treat. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the desert sage. Finally, Thunder approached the fence. His movements were careful, deliberate, ready to bolt or attack at the first sign of deception. But Jake remained still, and eventually Thunder lowered his great head and took the sugar cube with surprising delicacy. "That's it," Jake murmured. "Sweet things don't come with strings attached." As Thunder crunched the sugar, Jake found himself talking, not the sharp commands or threatening shouts the bull was used to, but genuine conversation. He spoke about the sunrise, about the way the mountains looked in the morning light, about anything that came to mind. But gradually, as the morning wore on, his words became more personal. "I had a daughter once," he said, watching Thunder's ears flick toward the sound of his voice. "Sarah, prettiest little girl you ever saw, with her mother's dark hair and eyes." that could see right through to your soul. His voice caught slightly. Haven't spoken to her in 3 years. Not since I proved what a disappointment a father could be. Thunder had moved closer to the fence, drawn by the rhythm and tone of Jake's voice. The bull seemed to sense the pain in the words, even if he couldn't understand their meaning. Our mother died when Sarah was born, Jake continued. Complications the doctor couldn't handle. I blamed myself, blamed God, blamed the whole world. Started drinking to dull the pain, and the more I drank, the angrier I got. Lost the ranch, lost my reputation, lost my daughter's respect. He pulled out another sugar cube, placing it closer to where he sat. Guess you know something about anger, don't you, Thunder? The bull considered the offering for a long moment before approaching. This time, he came close enough that Jake could see the scars on his hide in detail evidence of brutality that made Jake's stomach clench with fury at Thunder's previous owners. They hurt you bad, didn't they? Jake whispered. Made you believe. That's all humans were good for causing pain. I understand that feeling. After Mary died, I thought that's all I was good for, too, causing pain to the people I loved most. Thunder took the second sugar cube, and for just an instant, his eyes met Jake's through the fence rails. In that moment, Jake saw recognition pass between them, the acknowledgement of shared suffering, of parallel wounds that had shaped them both into outcasts. Over the following days, Jake established a routine. He arrived each morning at dawn, bringing sugar cubes in conversation. He never tried to rush the process, never pressed for more than Thunder was willing to give. Instead, he let the bull set the pace, respecting the boundaries that fear and pain had built. Slowly, Thunder began to respond. He would approach the fence when Jake arrived, his great head swinging low to catch the scent of sugar. He seemed to listen to Jake's voice, his ears forward and alert. Once, when a coyote howled in the distance, Thunder moved protectively closer to where Jake sat, as if guarding this strange human who brought sweetness instead of suffering. Jake told Thunder about his past, about the ranch he'd owned in Colorado, about the horses he'd trained with patience and understanding rather than force. He'd had a gift once, an almost supernatural ability to communicate with difficult animals. His neighbors had called him a horse whisperer, bringing him their most troubled mounts to gentle and train. I could talk to them, he confided to Thunder. One morning, watching the bull crunch another sugar cube. Not with words, but with something deeper. I could feel their fear, their confusion, their anger. And somehow, I could help them let it go. His voice grew bitter. Funny how I could heal broken animals, but couldn't heal my own broken heart. Thunder's response was subtle but unmistakable, a soft snort that sounded almost like sympathy. The bull had begun to recognize the rhythm of Jake's pain, the familiar cadence of loss and regret that mirrored his own experiences. As the week progressed, Jake noticed changes in Thunder's behavior beyond their morning interactions. The bull seemed calmer overall, less prone to the explosive rages that had terrorized the ranch hands. When other people approached his pen, Thunder still showed aggression, but it was more calculated now, less desperate. He was beginning to distinguish between Jake and the humans who might mean him harm. You're starting to hope again, aren't you? Jake asked one morning, watching Thunder accept his sugar cube with increasing trust. That's dangerous territory. For both of us. Hope's the thing that hurts most when it gets broken. But even as he spoke the words, Jake felt something stirring in his own chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Mary's death, he had purpose. Beyond simple survival. He had someone who needed him, someone who looked forward to his arrival each morning. Thunder, for his part, began to show signs of the magnificent animal he could have been under different circumstances. His coat had developed a healthier sheen. His eyes were brighter, and his movements had lost some of their frantic edge. The sugar cubes had become a symbol of trust between them, simple white squares that represented the possibility of kindness in a world that had shown them little. On the seventh morning, something extraordinary happened. As Jake approached with his usual offering, Thunder didn't wait by the fence. Instead, the bull moved toward him, crossing half the pen before stopping just out of reach. They stood looking at each other across 5 feet of space that might as well have been an ocean, both recognizing the significance of the moment. "We're getting somewhere, aren't we?" Jake said softly, placing a sugar cube on the ground between them. "Question is, where exactly are we going?" Thunder took a step closer, then another. His massive head lowered toward the sugar cube, but his eyes never left Jake's face. In that instant, Jake realized that Thunder wasn't just accepting the treat. He was accepting the possibility that not all humans were his enemies. It was a small step, measured in feet rather than miles. But for 2 souls who had given up on trust, it felt like crossing continents. 2 weeks into their daily meetings, Jake discovered something that changed everything. Hidden beneath a loose board in Thunder's shelter was an old, frayed rope halter, the kind used to lead bulls to pasture or to the breeding pen. But this halter told a story of cruelty that made Jake's hands shake with rage. The rope was stained with blood, old and dark, and the places where it would have rested against Thunder's face showed wear patterns that spoke of violent struggles. Worse, embedded in the fibers were what looked like wire barbs, cruel additions that would have cut into Thunder's skin with every movement of his head. "Sweet Lord," Jake whispered, holding the halter up to the morning light. "What kind of monsters were they?" Thunder had noticed Jake's discovery and was watching with increased agitation, his breathing quick and shallow. The sight of the halter clearly brought back memories that the bull would rather forget. Jake made a decision that would have seemed foolish to anyone watching. He opened the gate and stepped into Thunder's pen, carrying the halter with him. "This is what they used on you, isn't it?" he said softly, approaching Thunder with slow, deliberate steps. "This is how they tried to break you." Thunder's response was immediate and violent. He reared back on his hind legs, bellowing with rage and pain, his front hooves pawing the air. But Jake didn't retreat. Instead, he began to systematically tear the halter apart, his strong hands ripping through the blood-stained rope. "Never again," he said, his voice carrying a promise that seemed to resonate in Thunder's bones. "Nobody's ever going to hurt you like that again." As Jake destroyed the symbol of Thunder's torture, something shifted in the bull's demeanor. His bellowing faded to confused snorts, then to silence. He watched Jake tear apart the last remnants of the halter and scatter the pieces in the dirt. "You and we've both been broken by people who should have cared for us," Jake said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes it just means we understand pain in ways that whole people never could." Thunder approached cautiously, his massive head lowering to sniff at the scattered pieces of rope. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Jake's eyes, the bull began to methodically step on each piece, grinding them into the dirt with his hooves. "That's right," Jake encouraged. "Stomp it all into nothing. It can't hurt you anymore." From that day forward, their relationship deepened. Jake began spending entire mornings in the pen, sometimes bringing his father's Bible and reading aloud to Thunder. The bull seemed to enjoy the rhythm of the words, even if their meaning was beyond his understanding. Jake would read the passages. His father had marked stories of patience and forgiveness, of lost sheep being found and prodigal sons returning home. "My daddy used to read this to me," Jake explained one morning, his finger tracing his father's faded notes in the margins. He believed that every creature deserved compassion, no matter how far they'd fallen. He looked up at Thunder, who was lying in the dust nearby, chewing contentedly on a mouthful of hay. Yes, that includes broken-down cowboys and killer bulls. During these quiet hours, Jake found himself sharing memories he'd buried for years. He told Thunder about his wife, Mary, how she'd laugh at his attempts to cook, how she'd hum while braiding her long dark hair, how she'd made him feel like he could conquer the world with nothing but her faith in him. She wanted children so badly, he said one morning, his voice thick with old grief. We tried for years before Sarah came along. Mary used to say that God was just waiting for the right time, that he had a special little soul picked out just for us. Jake's hands clenched into fists. When she died bringing Sarah into the world, I couldn't understand how God could be so cruel. Taking the mother to give us the child, what kind of choice was that? Thunder lifted his great head and looked at Jake with those intelligent dark eyes. There was something in that gaze that felt like understanding, like comfort offered from one wounded soul to another. Sarah's grown now, Jake continued. 23 years old and prettier than her mother ever was. Last I heard, she was living in Denver, working as a schoolteacher. Probably has a beau by now, maybe thinking about marriage. His voice cracked. She wrote me letters for years, asking me to come see her, to be part of her life. I never answered, a single one. What could I say? That her father was a drunk who'd lost everything that mattered. Thunder moved closer, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than threatening. Jake reached out tentatively and, for the first time, touched the bull's forehead. Thunder didn't pull away. You know what the worst part is? Jake whispered. I was so busy drowning in my own pain that I forgot she was hurting too. She lost her mother the day she was born, and then she lost her father to grief and whiskey. That little girl needed me, and I failed her. As the days passed, Thunder began to show Jake the gentler side of his nature, a side that his previous owners had tried to beat out of him. The bull would nuzzle Jake's shoulder with surprising delicacy, seeking the comfort of human touch. He'd been denied for so long. He learned to recognize the sound of Jake's voice from across the ranch yard and would call out in greeting when he heard him approaching. But it was Jake who was changing most dramatically. The daily routine of caring for Thunder, of earning his trust one small gesture at a time, was awakening something in Jake that had been dormant for years. He was remembering what it felt like to be needed, to have purpose beyond his own survival. Martha noticed the change when Jake came into her saloon each evening. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes clearer, and he'd stopped ordering whiskey with his dinner. You're looking better, she observed one night, refilling his coffee cup. That bull's doing you as much good as you're doing him. Jake smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Maybe we're healing each other. Thunder's teaching me that trust is possible, even after betrayal. That connection is worth the risk of being hurt again. And what are you teaching him? Jake considered the question carefully, that not all humans are his enemies. That kindness exists, even if it's rare. That he's worthy of love, despite what others have told him. Martha's eyes softened. Sounds like lessons you both needed to learn. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Jake had first entered Thunder's pen. Jake arrived to find the bull standing by the gate, clearly agitated by the storm that was rolling across the valley. Lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the earth itself. Jake had never seen thunder react to storms before, but as he approached the pen, he realized the bull was genuinely frightened. Thunder was pacing frantically, his eyes wide with terror that had nothing to do with human cruelty and everything to do with elemental fear. Without hesitation, Jake opened the gate and entered the pen. Thunder immediately moved toward him, pressing his massive body against Jake's side like a frightened child seeking comfort from a parent. Jake wrapped his arms around Thunder's thick neck, feeling the animal's rapid heartbeat against his chest. It's all right, big fellow, Jake murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. Just noise and light. Can't hurt you. They stood together in the rain, man and beast finding solace in each other's presence while the storm raged overhead. In that moment, Jake realized that Thunder wasn't just trusting him. The bull was depending on him, looking to him for protection and comfort. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Jake said, stroking Thunder's rain-soaked neck. "From that first day when you wanted to kill me to this. You're not a killer, Thunder. You never were. You're just a creature who learned to fight because fighting was the only way to survive." Thunder's breathing gradually slowed as the storm moved on, but he remained close to Jake, reluctant to break the connection they'd forged in the midst of his fear. "I need to tell you something," Jake said quietly. "I've been thinking about my daughter Sarah, about those letters I never answered, about the coward I've been." He rested his forehead against Thunder's massive skull. "You've shown me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about trusting someone enough to be vulnerable with them. Maybe it's time I showed that kind of courage with my own family." Thunder seemed to sense the weight of Jake's words. The bull pulled back slightly and looked directly into Jake's eyes, and Jake could swear he saw encouragement there, a gentle nudging toward the redemption they both desperately needed. As the sun broke through the dissipating storm clouds, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives. He would write to Sarah. He would try to rebuild the bridge he burned with his grief and pride. And he would do it because Thunder had taught him that even the most damaged souls could learn to trust again. "Thank you," he whispered to the bull, "for showing me that broken doesn't mean beyond repair." The carved wooden whistle felt smooth under Jake's fingers as he worked on it by lamplight in his small room above Martha's saloon. He'd been whittling it for days, crafting it from a piece of cedar he'd found near the creek that ran through Blackwood's property. The whistle was simple, just a hollow tube with finger holes, but Jake had carved Thunder's initials into its side, along with his own dot. It had been a month since he'd first entered Thunder's pen, and their progress had been remarkable. Thunder now responded to Jake's voice commands, turning left or right, stopping or starting based on nothing more than gentle words and hand gestures. But Jake wanted something more, a way to communicate across distances, a secret language that belonged only to them. "Morning, Thunder," Jake called out as he approached the pen the next day, the whistle tucked safely in his shirt pocket. The bull was waiting for him, as had become their custom, standing alert and eager near the gate. Jake had taken to entering the pen each morning now, spending hours working with Thunder on basic commands and exercises. The bull had an extraordinary intelligence that had been masked by years of abuse and neglect. Under Jake's patient guidance, Thunder was revealing abilities that amazed even Cornelius Blackwood. "Got something new for us to try today," Jake said, pulling out the whistle and showing it to Thunder. The bull sniffed at the carved wood with interest, his nostrils flaring at the familiar scent of cedar. Jake put the whistle to his lips and blew a soft, low note. Thunder's ears perked up immediately, his head tilting in that endearingly curious way Jake had grown to love. The sound was unlike anything the bull had heard before, not the harsh shouts of angry men or the crack of whips, but something melodic and gentle. "This is our song," Jake explained, playing a simple sequence of notes. "When you hear this, you'll know it's me calling, even from far away." Over the following days, Jake worked with Thunder to establish different whistle commands. A rising note meant come, a falling note meant stay, and a complex trill was simply Jake's way of saying, "Hello, good boy." Thunder learned quickly, his responses becoming more precise with each session. But the real breakthrough came when Jake decided to try something that everyone, including himself, had thought impossible. He climbed onto Thunder's broad back. First time was tentative, just sitting astride the bull while Thunder stood perfectly still in the center of the pen. Jake could feel the immense power beneath him, the barely contained strength that could easily throw him off or crush him against the fence rails. But Thunder remained calm, accepting Jake's weight as naturally as if they'd been partners for years. "Good boy," Jake murmured, leaning forward to pat Thunder's neck. "You're remembering how to trust, aren't you?" Word of Jake's success had begun to spread beyond Cedar Ridge. Cattlemen from neighboring towns started making excuses to visit Blackwood's ranch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who could ride the killer bull. Some came out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, but all left with expressions of amazement. One morning, Jake found a group of well-dressed men gathered around Thunder's pen. Blackwood was among them, gesturing expansively as he spoke to what were clearly potential buyers. "Gentlemen, what you're about to see will redefine your understanding of what's possible with premium breeding stock," Blackwood was saying. "This bull represents not just superior genetics, but the pinnacle of training and temperament." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd known this day would come, the day when Blackwood would try to profit from the bond Jake had built with Thunder. But knowing it intellectually and facing it emotionally were two different things. "Jake," Blackwood called out as he approached. "Perfect timing. These gentlemen are considering Thunder for their breeding programs. Would you mind demonstrating what he can do?" The buyers were clearly wealthy ranchers and cattle dealers, men accustomed to evaluating livestock as investments rather than as living creatures with feelings and bonds. Jake could see the calculating looks in their eyes as they sized up Thunder, reducing the magnificent bull to bloodlines and profit margins. "Of course," Jake said, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. He opened the gate and entered Thunder's pen, acutely aware of the scrutinizing gazes fixed on them both. Thunder sensed something was different immediately. The bull's posture became more alert, almost protective, as if he could feel Jake's unease. When Jake climbed onto his back, Thunder moved with extra care, his steps measured and precise. Jake put the whistle to his lips and played their signal for forward. Thunder responded instantly, moving into a smooth, ground-covering stride that showcased his natural athleticism. They performed their full routine stops, starts, turns, and even a few simple jumps over low obstacles Jake had set up in the pen. The buyers were clearly impressed, murmuring among themselves about Thunder's responsiveness and Jake's evident skill. But Jake barely heard their comments. All he could think about was the possibility of losing Thunder, of watching the bull. He'd grown to love being loaded onto a trailer and taken away to some distant ranch where their bond would be forgotten. "Remarkable," one of the buyers said, as Jake dismounted. "How long did it take you to achieve this level of control?" "It's not control," Jake replied quietly. "It's partnership." The man looked puzzled. "What's the difference?" Jake glanced at Thunder, who was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes. "Control is about making someone do what you want through force or fear. Partnership is about building trust so deep that you both want the same thing." "And what do you and the bull want?" another buyer asked, his tone slightly mocking. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "To prove that connection is stronger than conquest. That understanding is more powerful than dominance. That sometimes the fiercest creatures carry the gentlest hearts." The buyers exchanged glances, clearly thinking Jake was either a philosopher or a fool. But Blackwood was beaming, already calculating the premium he could charge for a bull with such extraordinary training. After the buyers left, Blackwood approached Jake with an enthusiasm that made Jake's stomach churn. "That was magnificent," Blackwood exclaimed. "Did you see their faces? I could ask any price now, and they'd pay it gladly." "Thunder's not for sale," Jake said quietly. Blackwood's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon? He's not for sale. Not to them, not to anyone." "Jake, I appreciate what you've done with Thunder, but let's be clear about something. I own that bull. I've invested 3 years and a small fortune in him. The decision about whether to sell is mine, not yours." Jake felt Thunder move closer. Behind him, the bull's warm breath on his neck. "Some things can't be owned, Mr. Blackwood, only shared. Don't be naive, Blackwood snapped. This is business. Thunder is livestock, not a pet. And you're an employee, not a partner. The words hit Jake like physical blows, but before he could respond, Thunder stepped between him and Blackwood, his massive head lowered and his eyes fixed on the rancher with unmistakable threat. Blackwood took a quick step backward, suddenly remembering why he'd been afraid of Thunder in the first place. But Jake placed a calming hand on Thunder's neck. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "He's not worth it." Thunder relaxed, but remained positioned protectively between Jake and Blackwood, sending a clear message about where his loyalties lay. "We'll discuss this later," Blackwood said stiffly, backing away from the pen dot as the rancher walked toward his house. Jake pulled out his wooden whistle and played their "Hello" melody. Thunder's ears perked up, and despite the tension of the moment, the bull seemed to smile, if bulls could smile. "Don't worry," Jake whispered. "Nobody's going to separate us. I won't let that happen." But even as he made the promise, Jake wondered how he could possibly keep it. He was just a broken-down cowboy with no money and no power. Blackwood owned Thunder legally, and Jake had no claim beyond the bond they built. Still, as he looked into Thunder's trusting eyes, Jake made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, he would find a way to protect what they'd built together. Some things were worth fighting for, and Thunder was one of them. The faded photograph had been tucked between the pages of his father's Bible for so long that Jake had almost forgotten it was there. When it fluttered to the floor of his small room one evening, he stared at it for a long moment before picking it up with trembling hands. Mary smiled back at him from the warm paper, her dark hair catching sunlight as she held their infant daughter. Sarah couldn't have been more than a few months old in the picture, her tiny fist curled around her mother's finger. Jake remembered taking the photograph on their front porch, remembered the joy and hope that had filled their small ranch house. That summer day 23 years ago. "Lord, she was beautiful," he whispered, tracing Mary's face with his fingertip. "And look at Sarah, so small, so perfect. How did I let it all slip away?" The next morning, Jake carried the photograph with him to Thunder's pen. The bull greeted him with their usual ritual, a gentle nuzzle and a soft whicker of welcome. But Thunder seemed to sense Jake's subdued mood. "I want to show you something," Jake said, settling down on his usual wooden crate and pulling out the photograph. Thunder approached with curious interest, his great head lowering to sniff at the unfamiliar object. "This is my family," Jake explained, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife Mary and my daughter Sarah. This was taken just a few months before Mary died." He looked up at Thunder's intelligent eyes. "They were everything to me, Thunder. My whole world. And when I lost Mary, I was so afraid of losing Sarah too that I pushed her away myself." Thunder settled down in the dust beside Jake, his massive presence oddly comforting. The bull seemed to understand that this was an important moment, a sharing of sacred memories. "Sarah wrote me letters for years," Jake continued. "Beautiful letters telling me about her life, her dreams, her accomplishments. She became a teacher, just like her mother wanted to be. She's helping children learn and grow, making the world better just by being in it." His voice cracked. "And I never once wrote back. I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I couldn't see hers." Jake pulled a letter from his shirt pocket one. He'd written the night before and rewritten a dozen times. The envelope was addressed to Miss Sarah Sullivan in Denver, Colorado, in his careful handwriting. "I finally wrote to her," he told Thunder. "Asked if maybe, just maybe, she might be willing to see her old father again. Told her about you, about how you've helped me remember what it means to have something worth caring about." He scratched Thunder behind the ears. "Thinks you'd give me another chance?" Thunder's response was a gentle rumble deep in his chest, a sound Jake had learned meant contentment and approval. The bull had developed an entire vocabulary of sounds and gestures that Jake could interpret as clearly as spoken words. as the days passed, Jake found himself growing closer to Martha as well. She'd become more than just his landlord and provider of meals. She was his confidant, his sounding board, and increasingly, his source of comfort during the long evenings when loneliness threatened to overwhelm him. "You're different, Martha," observed one night as they sat on the saloon's front porch, watching the stars emerge over the desert. "Calmer, more at peace with yourself." "Thunder's taught me a lot about patience," Jake replied. "About taking things slow, building trust one day at a time. About not giving up on someone just because they've been hurt." Martha was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are we still talking about the bull?" Jake turned to look at her, really look at her. Martha was a handsome woman with laugh lines around her eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. She'd been kind to him from the moment he'd arrived in Cedar Ridge, offering not just room and board, but genuine friendship. More than that, she'd believed in him when he barely believed in himself. "Maybe not entirely," he admitted. "I'm glad," she said softly. "You're a good man, Jake Sullivan. It's nice to see you starting to believe that again." Their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. It wasn't passion, not yet, but something deeper and more lasting. Understanding, companionship, the possibility of building something real and lasting together. But Jake's growing contentment was interrupted 3 days later when a rider arrived at the Blackwood Ranch carrying news that changed everything. Thunder's reputation had spread far beyond the local cow country, and now someone with serious money was coming to see him. "Eastern Syndicate," Blackwood explained excitedly as Jake arrived for his morning session with Thunder. "They're buying a premium breeding stock for ranches back east. Big money, Jake. The kind of money that could set me up for life." Jake felt the familiar cold knot in his stomach. "When are they coming?" "Next week. I want Thunder looking his absolute best. We need to put on a show that'll make them open their checkbooks wide." Jake nodded mechanically, but his mind was racing. He'd known this day would come eventually, but he wasn't prepared for how much the thought of losing Thunder would hurt. The bull had become more than just an animal he was training. Thunder was his partner, his friend, his path back to redemption. That afternoon, as Jake worked with Thunder in the pen, he noticed that the bull seemed unusually protective. When one of Blackwood's remaining hands approached the fence, Thunder positioned himself between the man and Jake, his body language clearly warning the cowboy to keep his distance. "You know something's wrong, don't you?" Jake murmured, stroking Thunder's neck. "You can sense when I'm worried." Thunder's response was to press closer to Jake, his massive head resting gently against Jake's shoulder. The gesture was so human-like, so full of comfort and reassurance, that Jake felt tears sting his eyes. "We've been through too much together to give up now," Jake whispered. "Whatever happens, whatever they offer Blackwood, we'll face it together." But even as he made the promise, Jake wondered how he could possibly keep it. He was a drifter with no money, no legal claim to Thunder, and no power to stop a sale if Blackwood decided to go through with it. All he had was the bond he'd built with a bull that everyone else saw as livestock. Still, as Thunder settled down beside him in the dust, Jake made a decision. He would fight for what they built together. He would find a way to protect Thunder, even if it meant risking everything he'd begun to rebuild in Cedar Ridge. Some things were worth more than money, more than security, more than the comfortable life he'd started to imagine with Martha. Thunder had saved him from despair and given him purpose again. Now it was Jake's turn to save Thunder. "I won't let them take you," he promised, his hand resting on Thunder's powerful neck. "Whatever it takes, wherever we have to go, we'll stay together." Thunder's rumble of approval seemed to say that he understood, and that whatever came next, they would face it as partners. The photograph of Mary and Sarah remained tucked in Jake's pocket, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he still hoped to regain. But Thunder was here now, real and solid and trusting, proof that even the most broken souls could find their way back to love. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by the same postal rider who had delivered Jake's mail from Denver 3 days earlier. But this letter wasn't for Jake. It was addressed to Cornelius Blackwood, and it would change everything Jake thought he knew about Thunder's past. Jake was working with Thunder in the pen when he heard Blackwood's voice rise to an angry shout from the direction of the ranch house. Through the morning air, Jake could hear fragments of the rancher's tirade words like impossible and fraud and lawyers. Thunder sensed Jake's tension and moved closer, offering the comfort of his massive presence. But Jake's attention was fixed on the ranch house, where Blackwood had emerged onto the porch, waving a piece of paper in his hand. "Sullivan!" Blackwood bellowed. "Get over here." Now, Jake exchanged a look with Thunder, then reluctantly left the pen and walked toward the house. Blackwood's face was flushed with anger and what looked like panic. "Do you know anything about this?" Blackwood demanded, thrusting the letter at Jake. Jake took the paper and read it carefully. It was from a law firm in Denver, written on behalf of someone named Sarah Sullivan. The words seemed to swim before Jake's eyes as he realized what he was reading. "My daughter," he whispered. "Your daughter?" Blackwood's voice cracked with disbelief. "Your daughter is a lawyer?" "No," Jake said slowly, still reading. "But she hired one. She's been investigating Thunder's background." Jake looked up at Blackwood with growing understanding. "She says you never legally owned him." The letter was meticulously detailed, the result of weeks of research that Sarah had conducted after receiving Jake's letter about his work with Thunder. What she'd discovered would have been shocking if it weren't so tragically predictable. Thunder hadn't come from a legitimate cattle dealer, as Blackwood had claimed. He'd been stolen 3 years ago from a Lakota reservation in South Dakota, taken in a midnight raid by rustlers who specialized in acquiring valuable livestock through illegal means. The men who'd sold Thunder to Blackwood had forged ownership papers and disappeared with their money, leaving behind only a trail of false names and fraudulent documents. "This is impossible," Blackwood sputtered. "I have a bill of sale." "I have." "Papers. Forged papers," Jake said quietly, his mind reeling with the implications. "Sarah found the original ownership records. Thunder's registered name isn't Thunder, it's Wakinyella. It means Thunder being in Lakota. But the revelations didn't stop there. Sarah's investigation had uncovered the truth about Thunder's violent history as well. The 3 men Thunder had killed hadn't been innocent ranch hands trying to do their jobs. They'd been his original captors, the rustlers who'd stolen him from the reservation and brutalized him during his capture and transport. Thunder hadn't been a random killer driven mad by abuse. He'd been protecting himself from the very men who destroyed his life and torn him away from everything he'd known. His violence had been targeted, specific, and in its own way, justified. "The Lakota want him back," Jake said, continuing to read Sarah's letter. "They never stopped looking for him. He's not just valuable breeding stock to them, he's sacred. A descendant of buffalo runners, bred for spiritual ceremonies and cultural traditions that go back generations." Blackwood sank into a chair on his porch, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. 3 years, he muttered. 3 years and a fortune invested in stolen property. Jake felt a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Relief that Thunder's true nature was finally understood. Anger at the injustice Thunder had suffered. Pride in Sarah for uncovering the truth. And underneath it all, a growing fear about what this revelation meant for his relationship with Thunder. "There's more," Jake said, reading the final paragraphs of the letter. "Representatives from the Lakota Nation are coming here. They want to see Thunder to verify his identity. If he's who they think he is, and Sarah's research suggests he is, they'll be taking him home." The words hit Jake like physical blows. taking him home, away from Cedar Ridge, away from Jake. Thunder, as if sensing the emotional turmoil surrounding him, began to pace restlessly in his pen. The bull's keen intelligence had always allowed him to read human emotions with uncanny accuracy, and he could feel that something significant was happening. Jake walked back to the pen on unsteady legs, Blackwood's ranting fading to background noise behind him. Thunder approached the fence immediately, his dark eyes searching Jake's face for answers to questions he couldn't articulate. "Hey, big fellow," Jake said softly, his voice breaking slightly. "Looks like we've got some visitors coming." "People? Who knew you before all the bad things happened?" Thunder pressed his massive head against the fence rails, seeking the comfort of Jake's touch. Jake reached out and stroked the bull's forehead, marveling at how far they'd come from that first day when Thunder had charged him with murderous intent. "Your real name is Reconnecting," Jake whispered. "Thunder being. It suits you better than just Thunder, doesn't it? You were always more than just an animal. You were something special, something sacred." As the implications of Sarah's discovery sank in, Jake realized that everything he'd thought he understood about Thunder's story was wrong. The bull hadn't been broken by random cruelty. He'd been stolen from a people who loved and honored him, brutalized by men who saw him only as a commodity to be sold. And now those people wanted him back. Jake understood their claim. More than that, he respected it. Thunder belonged with his own kind, with people who understood his true value and his cultural significance. But understanding didn't make the prospect of losing him any easier to bear. "I always wondered why you seemed so noble," Jake said, continuing to stroke Thunder's neck. "Why you had such dignity, even when you were angry and hurt. You come from a line of animals that were partners, not property, companions, not just livestock." Thunder seemed to sense the weight of Jake's words. The bull's breathing was steady and calm, but his eyes remained fixed on Jake's face with an intensity that spoke of deep understanding. As the day wore on, Jake found himself remembering every moment of their journey together, from Thunder's first charge to their quiet conversations, from the destroyed halter to the carved whistle, from fear and mistrust to the deep bond they now shared. Tomorrow, everything would change. The Lakota representatives would arrive, and Jake would have to face the possibility that doing right by Thunder meant letting him go. But tonight, Thunder was still his partner, still his friend, still the magnificent creature who taught him that broken souls could heal each other through patience and trust. "Whatever happens," Jake whispered, "I want you to know that you saved me. You gave me back my faith in connection, in love, in the possibility of redemption. That's a gift I'll carry for the rest of my life." Thunder's gentle rumble seemed to say that the feeling was mutual, and for now, that was enough. The eagle feather arrived with the dawn, carried by an elderly Lakota man whose weathered face spoke of decades spent under the open sky. Joseph Standing Bear moved with the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned respect through wisdom rather than force. And when he offered Jake the sacred feather, it felt like receiving a blessing. "This belonged to Wakinyela's grandfather," Standing Bear explained, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who chose words carefully. "Every animal in his bloodline has been blessed with eagle medicine. They are warriors and healers, fighters and peacebringers." Jake accepted the feather with reverence, understanding instinctively that he was being given something precious beyond measure. The feather was magnificent, nearly a foot long, with intricate patterns of brown and white that seemed to shift and change in the morning light. "You are the one who gentled him," Standing Bear continued. It wasn't a question. "I am," Jake replied, simply, though I think he gentled me just as much. Standing Bear smiled, the expression transforming his serious features. "That is the way of sacred animals. They heal even as they are healed." Behind Standing Bear stood two younger Lakota men, his grandson Michael and a tribal elder named Robert Crowfeller. They'd driven straight through from South Dakota after receiving word that Reconnecting had been found, their urgency driven by more than just legal ownership. "Tell me about him," Standing Bear requested as they walked toward Thunder's pen. "Tell me how you found each other." Jake found himself sharing the entire story, his arrival in Cedar Ridge as a broken man, Thunder's reputation as a killer, their first meeting, and the slow building of trust. Standing Bear listened without interruption, his dark eyes watching Jake's face as much as his words. "You understand his spirit," Standing Bear said when Jake finished. "That is rare among your people. What can you tell me about his past?" Jake asked. "About what he was like before everything went wrong?" Standing Bear's expression grew sad. Reconnecting was raised among children. He was gentle with them, protective. The little ones would climb on his back, braid flowers in his mane. He was trained not with whips or spurs, but with songs and stories. The elder's voice hardened. "When the thieves came, they took more than just an animal. They stole a piece of our souls." Jake felt his throat tighten. The image of Thunder Reconnecting surrounded by laughing children was so different from the enraged, violent creature Jake had first encountered that it seemed impossible they were the same animal. "The men he killed," Jake said carefully. "They were the ones who took him? Billy Hawkins, Pete Martinez, Tommy Chun." Standing Bear recited the names like a litany of justice. "We've been tracking them for 3 years. They specialized in stealing sacred animals from reservations, horses, cattle, anything valuable enough to sell quickly. So when Thunder killed them, he was defending himself against his captors." Standing Bear finished. "Lakota law would call it justified. Your law might too, if animals had the same rights as people." They'd reached Thunder's pen now, and Jake could see the bull standing alert in the center of the enclosure. Thunder's attention was fixed on the new arrivals, his nostrils flaring as he caught their scent. "Reconnecting," Standing Bear called softly, using the bull's true name. Thunder's reaction was immediate and startling. His entire posture changed, his head coming up and his ears pricking forward. He approached the fence with more interest and wariness, as if something deep in his memory was stirring to life. Standing Bear began to speak in Lakota, his voice taking on a rhythmic, almost musical quality. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could feel their power. Thunder moved closer to the fence, his eyes fixed on Standing Bear's face with growing recognition. "He remembers," Michael Standing Bear whispered in amazement. "After all this time, he remembers." Jake felt his heart breaking as he watched Thunder respond to his native language. The bull's entire demeanor had changed, the wariness and controlled. Aggression were melting away, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "Would you like to see him up close?" Jake offered, though the words cost him tremendous effort. "I can bring him out of the pen." Standing Bear nodded gratefully. Jake opened the gate and entered Thunder's enclosure, acutely aware that this might be one of the last times he performed this ritual. Thunder came to him immediately, pressing his massive head against Jake's chest in their familiar greeting. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, his hand finding the carved whistle in his pocket. He played their hello melody, and Thunder's rumble of response seemed to vibrate through Jake's entire body. Leading Thunder out of the pen felt like a sacred ceremony. The bull moved with dignity and grace, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his black coat. When Standing Bear approached, Thunder allowed the elder to touch him without hesitation. Standing Bear's hands moved over Thunder's body with practiced expertise, checking old scars and noting the signs of his ordeal. But what seemed to affect the elder most was Thunder's calm acceptance of his touch. "He trusts you completely," Standing Bear observed, looking at Jake with new respect. "This is not a small thing. Reconnecting was betrayed by humans who should have protected him. For him to trust again, that speaks to the quality of your heart." Jake felt tears threatening. He saved my life just as much as I saved his. We were both broken when we found each other. And now? Jake looked at Thunder, who was standing quietly between him and Standing Bear, accepting attention from both, with equal grace. Now we're both healing. But I understand that he belongs with you, with his people. Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake's face. What if there was another way? What do you mean? Wakanyela was trained in the old ways, to work with humans as partners, not to be dominated by them. We have ceremonies, celebrations where such partnerships are honored. Standing Bear's eyes were kind but serious. What if you came with him? What if you learned our ways, became part of preserving what he represents? Jake's breath caught. The offer was unexpected, generous beyond anything he dared hope for, but it would mean leaving everything he'd begun to rebuild in Cedar Ridge, his growing relationship with Martha, his place in the community, the life he'd started to imagine for himself. I need time to think, Jake said carefully. Of course. But know this Wakanyela needs you as much as he needs us. Perhaps more. You've become his family, his chosen person. To separate you now would cause him the same kind of pain he suffered when he was stolen from us. Before Jake could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A convoy of trucks and trailers was making its way up the ranch road, kicking up clouds of dust. Cornelius Blackwood emerged from his house, his face grim with resignation. That'll be the Eastern Syndicate, Blackwood said as he approached. I sent word that the sale was off, but they insisted on coming anyway. Probably think they can pressure me into changing my mind. Standing Bear's expression hardened. They want to buy Wakanyela? Wanted to, Jake corrected. But that's not going to happen. Thunder belongs with his people. The lead vehicle pulled up to the ranch house, and Jake watched with growing unease as several well-dressed men emerged. They had the look of serious money-tailored suits despite the desert heat, expensive boots that had never seen real ranch work, and the confident bearing of people accustomed to getting what they wanted. Their leader was a tall, silver-haired man who introduced himself as Charles Pemberton, president of the Eastern Livestock Consortium. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and his eyes calculating as they took in Thunder standing calmly between Jake and Standing Bear. Mr. Blackwood, Pemberton said, his voice carrying the authority of serious wealth, I hope you'll reconsider your decision. We're prepared to make an offer that would set you up for life. The bull's not for sale, Blackwood replied wearily. I explained that in my telegram. Everything's for sale at the right price, Pemberton countered smoothly. His gaze shifted to Thunder, and Jake saw the man's eyes light up with avarice. My God, he's even more magnificent than we heard. Look at that confirmation, that presence. He'd be worth a fortune in our breeding program. Standing Bear stepped forward, his weathered face stern. This animal is not property to be sold. He belongs to the Lakota Nation. He was stolen from us 3 years ago. Pemberton's expression didn't change, but Jake caught a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. I'm sure that's a very interesting story, but I'm a businessman, not a historian. If there are legal issues, they can be worked out later. Right now, I'd like to make Mr. Blackwood an offer he can't refuse. You don't understand, Jake said, his voice carefully controlled. This isn't about money. Thunder Wakanyela is sacred to these people. He can't be bought or sold like ordinary livestock. Pemberton's laugh was dismissive. Sacred? He's a bull, son. A very valuable bull, but still just an animal. And animals exist to serve human purposes. Thunder seemed to sense the tension in the air. The bull moved closer to Jake, his massive body radiating protective energy. Standing Bear noticed the movement and spoke softly in Lakota, his words seeming to calm Thunder's growing agitation. What I'm offering, Pemberton continued, addressing Blackwood directly, is $500,000. Cash. Today. For that price, We'll handle all the legal complications, whatever they might be." The number hit like a physical blow. Half. $1 million was more money than Jake had ever imagined. Certainly more than Blackwood had ever dreamed of receiving for Thunder. For a moment, Jake saw the rancher waver, caught between his desperate financial situation and his growing understanding of Thunder's true significance. "That's a lot of money," Blackwood admitted quietly. "It is," Pemberton agreed. "And it's only the beginning. With proper management, this bull could generate millions in breeding fees over the next decade. You'd be a partner in one of the most successful livestock operations in the country." Jake felt his world tilting. $500,000. It was enough to save Blackwood's ranch, enough to set the man up for life, enough to make all of Thunder's suffering seem like a worthwhile investment in Pemberton's calculating mind. But when Jake looked at Thunder, he saw not a commodity, but a living being who'd survived betrayal and brutality to find trust again. He saw a sacred animal who belonged with people who understood his true value. He saw his friend, his partner, his path back to redemption. "Mr. Pemberton," Jake said quietly, "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The businessman turned to Jake with barely concealed impatience. "I'm sorry. Who are you exactly?" "I'm the man who spent the last 2 months building a relationship with Thunder. I'm the only person he trusts completely, the only one who can work with him safely." Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "And I'm telling you that he'll never be what you want him to be. Not in your breeding program, not in your business plan, not in your vision of profit and control." "Everyone has a price," Pemberton said coldly. "Not everyone," Jake replied, "and not everything." Standing Bear placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of support and solidarity. "My grandson is right," the elder said. "Some things cannot be bought. Some bonds cannot be broken by money. Some spirits cannot be owned." Pemberton's mask of civilized politeness was beginning to slip. "Look, I appreciate the philosophical discussion, but let's be practical here. This is the real world, where money talks and sentiment doesn't pay bills. Mr. Blackwood, you're a reasonable man. Surely you can see the wisdom of accepting our offer." The rancher looked torn, his gaze moving between Pemberton's confident face and Thunder's calm presence. Jake could see the internal struggle, financial desperation warring with growing moral awareness. "I don't know," Blackwood said finally. "This is all happening so fast. I need time to think." "Time is money," Pemberton pressed, "and I'm not in the habit of keeping offers open indefinitely. We have other opportunities, other investments. If you're not interested—" "He's interested in doing what's right," Jake interrupted. "And what's right is letting Thunder go home, where he belongs." Pemberton's eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake, all of you. This is business, not a fairy tale. That animal represents a significant investment opportunity, and I intend to acquire him one way or another." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jake felt Thunder tense beside him, the bull's instincts warning him of danger, even if he couldn't understand the words being spoken. Standing Bear's voice remained calm, but Jake could hear steel underneath. "Mr. Pemberton, I think it's time for you to leave. Wakaniela has been through enough trauma. He doesn't need any more." "I'm not going anywhere," Pemberton replied coldly. "Not without that bull." The confrontation was building towards something Jake couldn't yet see, but could definitely feel. Thunder was becoming increasingly agitated, his breathing quickening. As he sensed the hostile emotion swirling around him, the eagle feather in Jake's hand seemed to pulse with its own energy, a reminder of the sacred nature of what they were fighting to protect. In that moment, Jake realized that everything they'd built together, all the trust, all the healing, all the hope, was about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. The next few hours would determine not just Thunder's future, but the future of everyone who'd come to care about the magnificent animal who taught them all what it meant to believe in second chances. The medicine bundle appeared in standing. Bear's hands, as if by magic, a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork and eagle feathers that seemed to capture and hold the desert sunlight. Jake had never seen anything like it, but he could feel its power radiating outward, like heat from a forge. This belonged to Wakanila's bloodline for 7 generations. Standing Bear explained, his voice taking on the ceremonial cadence Jake had heard earlier. It carries the spirits of all his ancestors, the buffalo runners, the war horses, the sacred animals who served our people in peace and battle. Thunder's reaction to the medicine bundle was immediate and profound. The bull's head came up sharply, his nostrils flaring as he caught scents that triggered memories buried deep in his genetic code. He began to move towards Standing Bear with a reverence Jake had never seen before, as if recognizing something holy. "Fascinating," Pemberton said dismissively, though Jake caught a flicker of unease in the businessman's eyes. "Very colorful, very authentic, but ultimately irrelevant to our business here." "Mr. Pemberton," Blackwood said quietly, "maybe you should..." "Should what? Be intimidated by primitive superstition?" Pemberton's voice carried a sharp edge of contempt. "I'm offering you $500,000 for an animal. Everything else is just theater." Standing Bear's expression remained serene, but Jake could see anger building in the younger Lakota men behind him. Michael's hands had clenched into fists, and Robert Crow Feather was speaking in rapid, urgent Lakota that sounded like barely controlled fury. "You call our tradition superstition," Standing Bear said softly. "Yet you worship money as if it were sacred. Which of us is truly primitive?" Pemberton stepped forward aggressively, his civilized mask finally slipping completely. "I don't have time for philosophy lessons from relics of a dying culture. That bull is worth more money than your entire reservation sees in a year. I'm going to have him, one way or another." The threat was no longer subtle. Pemberton's men, Jake counted 6 of them, had spread out in a loose semicircle, their positions clearly strategic. These weren't just wealthy businessmen. They were professionals prepared for resistance. Thunder sensed the shift in atmosphere immediately. The bull's breathing quickened, his massive muscles tensing as he prepared for the kind of violence that had defined too much of his life. But instead of the blind rage Jake might have expected, Thunder's movements were controlled, purposeful, the response of a warrior rather than a victim. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, moving closer to Thunder's side. The bull's warmth was reassuring, solid and real in a situation that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. "Jake," Standing Bear said quietly, "take Wakaniela back to his pen. This doesn't concern him anymore." But Thunder refused to move. The bull planted his feet firmly in the dust and fixed his attention on Pemberton with an intensity that made the businessman take an involuntary step backward. "He's not going anywhere," Jake realized aloud. "He's protecting us." It was true. Thunder had positioned himself between the confronting groups, his massive frame serving as both barrier and statement. His message was clear. Anyone who wanted to hurt the people he'd learned to trust would have to go through him first. Pemberton's laugh was harsh and brittle. "Protecting you? He's an animal. A very large, very valuable animal that you've anthropomorphized beyond all reason. Watch." The businessman pulled a cattle prod from his jacket, a device Jake hadn't seen him carrying before. The metal rod crackled with electricity as Pemberton activated it, the sound cutting through the desert air like a blade. Thunder's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The bull's bellow of rage seemed to shake the earth itself, a sound that carried not just anger, but the accumulated pain of every betrayal, every abuse, every moment of suffering he'd endured. "Don't," Jake said, his voice carrying a warning that made Pemberton pause. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I'm dealing with an animal that needs to remember who's in charge," Pemberton replied, raising the cattle prod threateningly. The thunder didn't cower or retreat. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone present. The bull moved protectively in front of Jake, Standing Bear, and the other Lakota men, his massive body serving as a living shield. "My God," Blackwood whispered. "He's defending them." Standing Bear began to sing a low, rhythmic chant in Lakota that seemed to resonate with something deep in Thunder's spirit. The bull's agitation didn't decrease, but it became more focused, more purposeful. Jake could feel the change like electricity in the air. "Whatever you're planning," Jake told Pemberton quietly, "you need to stop. Right now." Thunder's not just any bull. He's been trained as a war horse. And right now, he thinks you're the enemy. Pemberton's response was to jab the cattle prod toward Thunder's shoulder. The electric shock would have sent most animals fleeing in pain and terror. Thunder caught the metal rod in his teeth and crushed it like a twig. The destruction of the cattle prod was so swift, so deliberate, that for a moment everyone simply stared in amazement. Thunder had moved with the precision of a trained fighter, disarming his opponent without causing injury, but making his capabilities unmistakably clear. "Impossible," one of Pemberton's men breathed. "Not impossible, Standing," Bear said with quiet pride. "Sacred. Lockenyella remembers what he is, what he was always meant to be." Thunder spat out the remains of the cattle prod and fixed his attention on Pemberton once again. The bull's message was clear. The businessman had revealed himself as a threat, and Thunder was prepared to respond accordingly. "This changes nothing," Pemberton said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "I still want that bull, and I'm prepared to take him." "Over my dead body," Jake said quietly. "That can be arranged," Pemberton replied, signaling to his men. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Jake realized that everything Thunder's freedom, the sacred bond they'd built, the possibility of redemption for them all hung in the balance of the next few moments. The medicine bundle in Standing Bear's hands seemed to pulse with spiritual energy. The eagle feather Jake still held felt warm against his palm. And Thunder stood ready to fight for the family he'd chosen. Whatever happened next would determine not just their immediate fate, but the future of everything they'd fought to build together. The braided rope lay coiled at Jake's feet like a symbol of everything he and Thunder had built together. Jake had woven it himself during the long evening hours, using techniques his father had taught him as a boy. But this rope was different. Every strand had been blessed by Standing Bear, and Thunder had helped in its creation, holding one end steady while Jake worked. Now, as Pemberton's men closed in, Jake picked up the rope with hands that didn't shake despite the dangers surrounding them. Thunder immediately moved to his side, and Jake could feel the bull's power coiled and ready, like a storm waiting to break. "Last chance," Pemberton called out, his voice tight with frustration. "Hand over the bull and everyone walks away unharmed." "No," Jake said simply. The word carried the weight of everything he'd learned about love and loyalty, about standing up for what mattered, even when the cost was high. Thunder's response was to press closer to Jake, the bull's massive shoulder touching Jake's arm in a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than words. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Standing Bear's voice rose in song again, the Lakota words flowing like water over stone. The melody was ancient, powerful, and as it reached Thunder's ears, something extraordinary happened. The bull began to move not with the wild rage of a trapped animal, but with the controlled power of a warrior answering a call to battle. Thunder's charge wasn't random or desperate. It was strategic, precise, magnificent. He moved like his ancestors had moved across the plains, with purpose and grace and deadly efficiency. Pemberton's men scattered before him, their confident positions dissolving into chaos as 2,000. Pounds of sacred fury bore down on them, But Thunder wasn't trying to hurt them. Jake realized with amazement that the bull was hurting them, using his size and speed to drive Pemberton's men away from the confrontation rather than trampling them. Even in his anger, Thunder remembered the lessons Jake had taught him about controlling his power. Incredible, Michael Standing Bear breathed. He fights like the old ones, with honor. Pemberton himself had retreated to his vehicle, his face pale with a mixture of fear and frustrated greed. "This isn't over," he shouted. "I'll be back with legal papers, with court orders. That bull is worth too much to let him disappear into some reservation." Standing Bear approached Pemberton's truck, the medicine bundle still in his hands. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of generations. "Mr. Pemberton, let me tell you something about true value. You see money when you look at Reconnecting. We see family. You see profit. We see sacred trust passed down through 7 generations. You think power comes from taking what you want. We know it comes from protecting what you love." Thunder had positioned himself between Pemberton's truck and the others, his breathing steady but his attention focused. The bull was still ready to fight if necessary, but his posture had shifted from aggressive to protective. "This is business." Pemberton protested. "Sentiment doesn't matter in the real world." "Whose real world?" Jake asked, stepping forward. "Yours?" "The one where everything has a price and nothing has value beyond what someone will pay for it." He gestured toward Thunder, who watched the exchange with intelligent eyes. "Or maybe the real world is the one where a broken man and a wounded animal can heal each other through patience and trust." Standing Bear nodded approvingly. "Jake speaks truth. In our world, some bonds cannot be broken by money. Some relationships are sacred." As if to demonstrate this point, Thunder approached Jake and gently nuzzled his shoulder. The gesture was so tender, so full of affection and trust, that even some of Pemberton's men seemed moved by it. "I've made my choice," Cornelius Blackwood said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at the rancher, who had been silent during the confrontation. "Pemberton, your money doesn't interest me. Not anymore." "You're making a mistake," Pemberton warned. $500,000 is just paper," Blackwood finished. "Jake showed me something worth more than money. He showed me what it looks like when 2 souls heal each other. I won't be the one to break that bond." Jake felt a surge of gratitude toward the rancher. Blackwood was sacrificing a fortune, choosing principle over profit in a way that honored everything Thunder represented. "Then I'll take this matter to court," Pemberton threatened. "I'll prove that bull is stolen property, that these people have no legal right to him." Standing Bear smiled an expression that held both wisdom and steel. "Actually, Mr. Pemberton, we have something better than legal rights. We have federal law on our side." The elder pulled out a document Jake hadn't seen before, official papers bearing government seals and legal language that made Pemberton's face go white. "The Indian Religious Freedom Act," Standing Bear explained calmly. "It protects our right to practice our religion and maintain our sacred traditions. Reconnecting isn't just any bull, he's a sacred animal protected under federal law. Interfering with our religious practices is a federal crime." That's impossible," Pemberton stammered. "Very possible," a new voice said from behind them. Everyone turned to see a woman approaching, a woman Jake recognized from the faded photograph he'd carried for so long. "Sarah," Jake breathed, hardly believing his eyes. Sarah Sullivan was 33 now, tall and graceful with her mother's dark hair and eyes that held both strength and compassion. She wore a lawyer's professional attire, but her smile was pure warmth as she looked at her father. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. "I got your letter." Jake felt tears sting his eyes. "You came." "Of course I came. You said you'd found something worth caring about again. I had to see what could bring my father back to life." Sarah's gaze moved to Thunder, and her expression filled with wonder. So this is the famous Thunder, the bull who saved my father's soul. Thunder, perhaps sensing the emotional significance of the moment, approached Sarah with careful curiosity. When she extended her hand, he sniffed it gently before allowing her to stroke his forehead. "He's magnificent," Sarah whispered. "I can see why you love him." "Sarah's the lawyer who did the research," Jake explained to Standing Bear. "She's the one who discovered Thunder's true identity. And I'm here to make sure justice is done," Sarah added, turning to face Pemberton with professional authority. "Mr. Pemberton, any attempt to interfere with the return of sacred property to its rightful owners will result in federal charges. I suggest you leave. Now." Pemberton looked around at the united front facing him. Jake and Thunder, the Lakota delegation, Blackwood, and now a federal lawyer who happened to be Jake's daughter. His dreams of profit were crumbling, and he clearly knew it. "This isn't over," he said weakly, but the fight had gone out of him. "Yes, it is," Standing Bear said, with finality. "Reconnecting is going home." As Pemberton and his men drove away in defeat, Jake found himself standing in the desert dust with his daughter, his chosen family of Lakota friends, and the magnificent bull who had taught them all what it meant to fight for love. The braided rope in Jake's hands wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol of unbreakable bonds, of connections that couldn't be severed by money or threats or the passage of time. Thunder was safe. Thunder was going home. And somehow, Jake realized so was he. 6 months later, the new brand glowed cherry red in the forge fire as Jake carefully shaped the metal. It was unlike any brand he'd ever made, a unique design that combined his initials with traditional Lakota symbols, representing the bridge between two worlds that he and Thunder had helped to build. The brand wasn't meant for Thunder's hide. Instead, it would mark the gateposts of the special corral they built on the reservation, a place where Thunder could live in the manner of his ancestors while still maintaining his partnership with Jake. "It's beautiful work," Standing Bear observed, watching Jake pull the brand from the fire and examine the intricate metalwork. "Your father would be proud." Jake smiled, thinking of the worn Bible that now sat on his new knitstand, its margin notes more precious to him than ever. He always said that the best work comes from the heart. I think I'm finally understanding what he meant. The reservation had become Jake's home in ways he'd never expected. Standing Bear had been true to his word. Jake was learning the old ways of working with sacred animals, techniques that emphasize partnership and respect rather than dominance. In return, Jake was teaching younger members of the tribe his methods of gentling difficult horses and cattle. Thunder Reconnecting had blossomed in his new environment. The bull moved freely across hundreds of acres of prairie, but he always returned to the special corral where Jake waited for him each morning. Their bond hadn't weakened with Thunder's freedom. If anything, it had grown stronger. "He looks happy," Sarah observed, joining them at the fence where Thunder grazed peacefully with a small herd of buffalo. She'd extended her stay far beyond the week she'd originally planned, drawn by the opportunity to reconnect with her father and witness his transformation. "He looks whole," Jake replied, watching Thunder lift his massive head to scan the horizon. "Like he's finally where he belongs." Sarah had been documenting their story, working with Standing Bear to create a record of Thunder's journey that would help protect other sacred animals from theft and exploitation. Her legal expertise had proven invaluable in establishing new protections for Native American religious practices. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. What you did with Thunder, what you've built here, it's everything Mom would have wanted for you." Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest when Mary's memory surfaced, but now it was tempered with warmth rather than overwhelmed by grief. "Your mother always believed that broken things could be mended if you had enough patience and love. I just forgot that lesson for a while. And Thunder helped you remember? Thunder and a lot of other people." Jake's gaze moved to where Martha was setting up a picnic lunch near the creek. She'd driven up from Cedar Ridge for the weekend, as had become her custom. Their relationship was growing slowly, built on the same foundation of trust and patience that had characterized Jake's work with Thunder. The afternoon brought visitors, members of other tribes who'd heard about Thunder's story and wanted to see the legendary bull for themselves. Word had spread throughout the Native American community about the sacred animal who'd been stolen and recovered, and Thunder had become a symbol of cultural resilience and the power of traditional ways. As Jake watched Thunder interact with the visitors' children, allowing them to pet his neck and braid flowers in his mane, just as Standing Bear had described from the bull's youth, he marveled at the circle their lives had traveled. From violence and mistrust to this scene of gentle communion. Uncle Jake, Michael Standing Bear, called out, using the honorary title the family had given him. Wakanila's getting restless. I think he wants to show off. It was true. Thunder had noticed Jake watching and was approaching the fence with that purposeful stride that meant he was ready to work. Their training sessions had evolved into something more like dance than instruction, a flowing partnership that drew crowds whenever they performed at cultural celebrations or wild West shows. Jake entered the corral, and Thunder immediately moved to his side. No halter was needed. Thunder responded to voice commands, hand signals, and the carved whistle that Jake still carried in his pocket. "Show them what we can do, boy," Jake murmured, and Thunder seemed to smile. What followed was a demonstration of trust so complete, so seamless, that the watching crowd fell silent with awe. Thunder performed intricate maneuvers, with Jake riding bareback, responding to the slightest shift in weight or the softest spoken command. They moved together like one entity, two spirits joined in perfect harmony. But the most powerful moment came when Jake dismounted and simply stood beside Thunder, one hand resting on the bull's neck. In that simple pose, they embodied everything their story represented: the possibility of healing, the power of patient love, the triumph of understanding over force. "They're writing children's books about you two," Sarah told Jake later as they sat around Martha's picnic blanket. "Publishers are calling it a modern legend," Jake chuckled. "Legend seems like a big word for a broken-down cowboy and a misunderstood bull." "That's exactly what makes it legendary," Standing Bear observed. "The greatest stories are about ordinary souls who do extraordinary things." As the sun began to set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thunder approached their gathering. The bull moved with the calm confidence of an animal completely at peace with his world, secure in the knowledge that he was loved and protected. Jake stood and wrapped his arms around Thunder's massive neck, breathing in the familiar scent of warm hide and prairie grass. In that embrace, he felt the presence of everyone who had helped them reach this moment. Mary's memory blessing their new beginning, Sarah's forgiveness healing old wounds, Standing Bear's wisdom showing them the way forward, and Martha's love promising a future worth building. "Thank you," Jake whispered to Thunder, just as he had that first day in the storm, "for teaching me that broken doesn't mean worthless, that trust is possible, even after betrayal. That love is worth the risk of being hurt again." Thunder's gentle rumble seemed to say that the gratitude was mutual. They had saved each other, healed each other, and found their way home together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jake pulled out his father's Bible and read aloud by the flickering light of their campfire. The words were the same ones his father had marked decades earlier, passages about lost sheep being found and prodigal sons returning home. But now Jake understood them differently, not as promises of divine intervention, but as recognition of the healing power of love itself. Thunder lay down nearby, his great bulk a comforting presence in the gathering darkness. Around them, the prairie whispered with wind and the distant lowing of cattle, the eternal sounds of the land that had always been home to both man and beast. In the morning, Jake would wake to Thunder's gentle nuzzle, and they would begin another day of their shared life. There would be training sessions and cultural ceremonies, visitors to educate, and young animals to gentle. There would be quiet moments and joyful celebrations. The simple rhythms of a life lived in harmony with both nature and purpose. But tonight, under the vast canopy of stars, Jake simply held his daughter's hand and listened to Thunder's peaceful breathing, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them all together. Sometimes the fiercest creatures did carry the gentlest hearts. Sometimes broken souls could heal each other through patience and trust. Sometimes love was stronger than fear, and redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to believe in second chances. The bull and the cowboy had found their way home at last,